My name is William Carr. I'm 66 years old. I've lived for more than 3 decades with my wife, Jessica, in a simple, light wood house in a quiet neighborhood here in Portland. And lo and behold, so I, who have lived so much in this life, never imagined that a simple package on the balcony on a Sunday morning could turn me inside out. Have you ever received something from someone in your family that it seemed more like a warning than a gift? It's strange how time changes people. I remember my tiny daughter Samantha, running around the yard with her cheeks dirty with juice and her hair stuck to her face. On Father's Day, she handed me cards filled with glue and glitter, with crooked letters and an "I love you, Dad" written with colored pencils. Today she barely calls me. He only remembers that I exist when he needs money. And this last Sunday, instead of a hug, she sent me a box. In this video, you'll understand what was inside that box. And more than that, you will discover how far the coldness of someone we raised with love can go. Because after my wife looked at me and said, "Willian, don't open it," everything changed. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know something. The very moment my fingers touched that box, I felt something was wrong. Jessica, my companion of so many years, stood still for a second, then slowly approached and said something I'll never forget. "Willian, do not open. You can't see that." Her voice was not one of fear. It was something worse. Absolutely. And when I noticed the small holes in the side of the package, and I heard that whisper coming from within, as if there was life inside, time has stopped. I called 911 before I even understood what I was feeling. If you are listening to me now, I sincerely ask you to leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and follow me until the end. Not for the video itself, but because it tells it. It demands from me a strength that I didn't even know I had yet. Sometimes we need to feel that we are not alone to be able to continue. And if that story resonates with something you've lived through, or are afraid to live, then maybe we can get through it together. Because there are wounds that only heal when they are shared. Sunday began like so many others. Clear skies, the smell of wet earth from garden irrigation, and the familiar creaking of my rocking chair, there on the balcony. I held my mug with both hands, trying to absorb some heat in that silence. The newspaper folded in my lap, and our eyes fixed on the Hendersons, our neighbors across the street, who were already setting up the barbecue in the backyard. The sound of children's laughter, the crackling of burning wood, everything seemed distant to me. Beautiful, but distant. Jessica was inside, making coffee the way she always did. Scrambled eggs with butter, thin pancakes and too much egg whites, which she insists on calling French style. And me? I pretended I was hungry. The phone didn't ring, and as much as I told myself I didn't expect it, a part of me still did. Samantha always said that she forgot dates, that she was always busy. But Father's Day? You can't forget on purpose, right? Even more so after everything I did for her. But it had been 3 months since the last call, and it was just to ask for money. An emergency loan. Emergency for her, sacrifice for me. On the small table in the hallway, there was an envelope that was still sealed. It arrived a few days earlier. Father's Day card for sure. But I didn't have the courage to open it, for fear of what would not be written, for fear that it was just another printed card, with a cold signature at the end. Something bought in a hurry, just so it doesn't look like he forgot. Jessica put the plate on the table, called me with that light tone of someone who wants to avoid conflict. "Eggs are ready, love." I went in. I smiled small, sat. She served me fresh coffee, but deep in her eyes I saw it. She was also waiting, not for her, but for me, because he knows me, because you know how these dates move me. We ate in silence, just the sound of cutlery scratching the plates, and once in a while a look. We love each other, but there are days when love does not cover silence. After breakfast, I went back to the balcony. Jessica started to organize the dishes. That's when the UPS truck showed up on the corner. That dry noise of the brakes made me look up. The driver jumped out of the cab, checked something on the tablet, and came towards us with a box in his hand. "Deliver it to Mr. William Carr?" "It's me. Happy Father's Day," he said, with a tired half smile. I signed with trembling fingers. The box was light, average, no clear sender. I placed it on the small table next to the door. "Whose is this?" I murmured. Jessica came to the door, drying her hands. Her gaze immediately changed. She didn't touch the box. He approached slowly, as if recognizing a bad smell coming from afar. And then he said, "Willian, don't open it." "What do you mean?" You can't see that. Her voice pierced me. Low, firm, unlike anything I've ever heard from that woman. It was as if she had seen something I hadn't yet noticed. I lowered my eyes. The box had small holes, almost invisible at first glance. Circular slits. 1, 2, 5. Like breathing holes. I put my ear to it slowly, and that's when I heard it. A sound. A dry rustle. Like something moving inside. Alive. My heart raced. The hand was sweaty on the wood of the chair. The box stood there between the two of us, as if it were suddenly an enemy. Jessica took a step back. He looked at me as if asking, "Don't do that." I took a deep breath. The coffee turned bitter in my mouth, and that's when I found myself thinking, how can a relationship get to this point? Where does a father, on a Father's Day Sunday, look at a gift from his daughter as if facing a threat? Allow me to pause here, because maybe you felt it too. That moment when you realize that someone in your own family has become a stranger, that everything you gave was used against you. That love has become a burden. If you've experienced something like this, write here in the comments, "I've lived it," or "It touched me." Sometimes that's all we need to not go crazy, knowing that he was not the only one. I stood there, paralyzed. I looked at the box and it seemed to look back. Jessica was half a meter away, but it seemed farther away. All the time I thought, Samantha, what did you do? Was it her? Did he have the courage? And if so, what exactly was inside that box? And the hardest of all, why? The answer I found out shortly after, but nothing would prepare me for what came next, because it has gifts that are delivered just to leave a scar. And what came inside that box, it was more than a scare. It was a message, and you won't believe what was inside. The box remained there on the balcony table as a foreign body, displaced from time and place. I didn't take my eyes off her. There was something in that package that didn't make sense. It was too light but firm, made with that thick cardboard from an expensive order, and even without a clear sender, it had been sent with express delivery, on a Sunday. Who pays for something like this in a country where people avoid even birthday cards? Jessica took another step back. I remember the way she held her own arm, as if she had felt a shiver. "Don't open, Willian. Please." Her voice was not one of fear. It was a presentiment, as if he knew that some invisible line had been crossed. I knelt slowly next to the box and noticed the small holes. Well positioned, all the same size. A pattern. They were not a factory defect. They were deliberate. Were to breathe. And the sound. The sound was still there. A muffled noise like something dragging itself very slowly on paper. A whisper of dry skin. He seemed alive. "Is it a gift?" I asked. But even I didn't believe what he said. Jessica didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the box. They seemed to try to cross it with their eyes. For a moment I thought she was going to cry. Or scream. But she just said, "She sent that, didn't she?" I didn't answer. He didn't need to. Samantha was the only one who would have the courage. Or cruelty. Or both. I stood up, my knee cracking as always, and entered the house with the box in my hands. I placed it on the living room table, under the light of the skylight. I kept watching. He didn't know if he was going to pick up a knife or the phone. Jessica followed me but stopped at the door. The whole house seemed smaller, as if everything had shrunk in front of that package. The wall clock read 10:13 a.m. The shadows danced slowly over the wooden floor. The rustling continued. Regular. Contained. And that's when I felt it. Not fear, but a kind of bitter shame. Shame for having come this far. To have fed, with affection and effort, a daughter who was now sending me. Right. Whatever it was not a gesture of love. It was a warning. A message disguised as a gift. And deep down, a provocation. As if to say, "Look how far I can go." I rang the phone. The keys slipped under my fingers. I typed 911. The attendant's voice was young, protocol. "What is the emergency?" I told everything calmly. A suspicious box, delivered directly to me, with signs of containing a live animal. The sound, the holes, the complicated family history. I asked them to send someone, but I also asked them not to turn on sirens. I didn't want to make a fuss, not yet. Turned off. Jessica leaned against the door of the room gently. We stood there, in silence, listening to time pass. It was at that time that I understood. What was inside the box was not just a threat. It was a mirror. It showed everything we had let get lost inside our own house. But the question that tortured me kept popping into my head. What did she put inside? And worse, Why? Because what came in that box? He was not just a creature. It was the beginning of the end. And what I found out when it was opened, it made me rethink everything I've lived so far. Everything. It was then that Jessica, still standing, with her arms crossed as if protecting herself from her own thought, murmured without looking at me, "Do you remember that charge on the card? The $127? Reptile Palace?" At first the memory escaped me like a dream that evaporates when I wake up, but all it took was the name, Reptile Palace, and it all came to light. We received the invoice a month ago. The value was not high, and we imagined that it was a thing of the grandchildren, maybe toys or even a school science kit. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I even joked, "Are they breeding dinosaurs now?" Jessica laughed at the time. But now that made too much sense. The value, the store, the box, the sound coming from within. I felt my stomach turn as if I was swallowing stones. Reptile Palace was a reptile store in Salem, 2 hours from here. I remembered that Samantha was in that area in May, on a weekend with Peter. She said it was to take the boys to the state park. But what if it wasn't? What if? I sat on the edge of the couch, resting my elbows on my knees. The mind worked faster than the body. I also remembered the last discussion we had. A little over 2 months ago, Samantha wanted to advance a part of the inheritance. He said it was to buy a bigger house. Peter had lost his job again, and she wanted to make a family investment. I said no, quietly, but firmly. I explained that we were still alive. That inheritance is not an anticipated salary. She slammed the kitchen door so hard that the pictures shook. Peter let out a mocking laugh, the kind that only cowards know how to do. "After all, the old man won't spend everything before he dies, right?" he said without the slightest respect. That was engraved in my memory as a tattoo. In the following weeks, absolute silence. Not a single call, not a message from the children, and now this package. This Sunday, Father's Day, coming from a reptile shop. I knew it. Deep down, I already knew, but I still tried to deny it to myself. What kind of daughter does this to her own father? What kind of person turns hurt into a living threat? The wound was not only emotional, it was symbolic. It was as if she said, "You are nothing to me anymore, just an obstacle." I got up and went to the office. At the bottom of a drawer, I found the receipt for the card bill. There it was, Reptile Palace, $127.50. Date, May 7th, 2 weeks after the fight. The stomach turned again. I sat back in the living room and looked at Jessica. She just nodded. He knew it too. We didn't need to say anything more. There was no more possible innocence there, and yet, a part of me refused to accept it. It was as if my heart screamed, "It can't be her," but it was. It was her. And if he was capable of that, what else would it be capable of? What exactly was inside that box? What did she want to happen to me that day? And why just now? Did she think I was going to open up, get scared, fall the floor? Was that the plan? Did she want to break me for good? What was behind that? It was darker than I wanted to imagine. And what came next made everything even clearer and much more cruel. I picked up the phone with my hands still shaking. I remember hesitating for a second, looking at the screen as if that number had weight. 911. I never had to call, not even when I broke my ankle cleaning the roof. But there it was no longer a matter of fright. It was something bigger. I took a deep breath and dialed in. On the other side, a young protocol voice answered me. "What is the emergency?" I told everything calmly. He said that he had received a package without a sender, with small breathing holes and a noise coming from inside, similar to rustling, that the family history was complicated, and that I feared that there was some kind of animal in there. The girl was silent for a second, then asked me to move away from the package immediately, not to try to open it and to wait for a patrol car. "Mr. Carr, keep your distance and wait. A team is on the way." I hung up and leaned against the wall. Jessica came over to me and held my arm tightly. I didn't say anything, but the way she pressed her fingers on my wrist said it all. We were afraid, and it wasn't just the box. It was what it symbolized, of what she revealed about our daughter. Time, there inside that room, seemed different. The sound of the clock was too loud. The ticking, once imperceptible, now seemed to hit inside my chest. When the car arrived, it did not turn on the siren, just the sound of doors slamming outside. The agent was a white man in his 50s, tall, calm posture. "T. Reeves," the badge said. He entered slowly, as if he had seen everything. We received the call, show me the box. Pointed. He approached carefully, observed the holes, put his ear to it, waited a few seconds. Then he looked at me. There is something alive here, probably a snake. The sound is characteristic. My body froze. I knew it, but to hear it from the mouth of a police officer, it was different. It was official. Jessica sat on the couch. She was pale. The agent walked away and asked for backup over the radio. He said animal control was on the way. Mr. Carr, do you have any idea who could have sent this? I hesitated. I meant no, I wanted to protect. But I couldn't lie. I just lowered my eyes. He understood. I see. Sometimes in families the worst things come from within. But we'll deal with it. He stood there with us, standing between us and the box. A human barrier between the past and the present. I looked at the packaging as if facing a shadow, because deep down, that box was more than a scare. It was a mirror. She showed me what I had tried to deny for years, that my daughter no longer saw me as a father, and more than that, perhaps not even as a human being. Jessica began to cry silently. It was not a cry of scandal. It was that small cry of someone who has cried a lot inside, and no longer has the strength to hold it. I sat next to her, ran my hand over her back slowly and said, "We're going to get through this. Together." But my voice failed. Deep down, I felt something inside me breaking, as if that box had opened a wound that would no longer heal. I'm sorry to open my heart like that, but if you're here so far listening to my story, I wanted to ask you one thing. Leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. It's not by number, no. It's just that I still have a lot of things in store to tell you. And knowing that there is someone there listening gives me the strength to continue. And if what I'm telling you touched you in any way, that alone is worth everything. When animal control arrived, the silence of the house turned to concentrated tension. The agent put on his gloves, approached the box with long tweezers and trained eyes. I watched every movement, as if my life depended on that gesture. And at that moment, one thing went through me like a knife. What did she want to happen to me when I opened it? Because one thing was clear. That wasn't just a provocation, it was a test, and the answer, which would come in the next few minutes, it was going to change everything, even what I thought about myself. As the animal control agents prepared to open the box, I pulled back a bit. I sat in the armchair in the living room, right in front of the unlit fireplace where we have kept a silver frame for years. In it, an old photo of Samantha. He must have been about 8 years old, hair tied with a blue ribbon that Jessica put on herself. And that smile of someone who still believed that the world was only made of summer. We were at a fair in Eugene back in the 90s. I carried her on my shoulders, and she held a cotton candy larger than her head. I remember that day as if it were now. It was first of all complicating. Before the requests, the demands, before the wounds that never healed. We didn't even have money to travel at the time, but we made it fit the budget. I sold a set of wheels from my car just to pay for gas and park tickets, and I don't regret it. Not by a long shot. I also don't regret the car I sold years later to pay for her college tuition, nor the nights awake with her on the phone crying because of a disappointment or saying he was going to give up everything. I stood there, even with my eyes closed, listening, trying to be shelter. Even when she got married, even without our full approval, I was the one who wrote the check for that over-the-top dress, just because she said she always dreamed of getting married with French lace. And when Peter started bouncing from job to job, guess who held the ends at first? It was me. The electricity bill, the mortgage advance, the checks for emergencies that never came back. Jessica was in the kitchen when she came back with a cloth in her hands and her eyes downcast. She stopped next to me and asked me very softly, as if afraid to hear the answer, "At what point did we lose her, Willian?" I didn't know how to answer. I could only squeeze the cloth she was holding and say, "I think it was gradually, and we didn't see it." She shook her head, her eyes full. "Remember the card she made at Christmas? With colored paper, those stick figures holding hands?" I remembered. They are all stored in a box in the attic. One said, "Daddy and Mommy, you are my world." Today that same world has become a minefield, and we didn't even see the warning sign. I stared at the photo frame, wondering if that girl still existed somewhere inside the woman who sent that box, or if we were the ones who had created a fantasy, and it never really existed. The noise of the tape being cut brought me back. The agents were already there preparing to open. Jessica walked away. I stood up. I stood at the entrance of the room as if one part of me didn't want to see it. and the other did, because whatever came out of there, it wouldn't be just an animal. It was going to be the truth that no one wants to see up close. And what jumped out of that box, it wasn't just an animal. It was the last piece of a puzzle that I'd been putting together for years without realizing it. And it changed everything I thought about love, about blood, and about how far one can go, just to see the other fall. Mike Johnson was a robust man, one of those you imagine on the trails of Oregon with a flashlight and a machete around his waist. He came with the light brown animal control uniform, thick gloves, a black briefcase, and a look that had seen too much. "Mr. Carr?" he said as he entered, and I just pointed to the box. I couldn't say a word. Mike approached, crouched down, analyzed the holes, and moved his head in slight approval. He was right not to open. A lot of people try to be curious and end up regretting it. He took a pair of scissors with a curved tip from the briefcase and began to cut the duct tape gently, as if opening a stitched wound. Jessica positioned herself behind me, with her hand resting on my back. When the lid lifted, it was as if the air in the room stopped. Mike looked inside, nodded, and muttered, "That's what I thought." With a precise movement, he stuck his protected hand and pulled from inside a reddish-orange snake, with black and white spots along its body. It was long, elegant, and lively. A corn snake. It was not poisonous, but still, it was not a gift. It was a message. "This one is domesticated," he said, "bred in captivity. She was not caught by mistake. Someone bought, packaged, paid for the delivery, and sent it straight to you. This was not a store error." Agent Reeves approached. He crossed his arms. "This was planned." I didn't say anything. I just kept looking at the snake, now contained in an acrylic container, with those round, empty eyes that seemed to see me inside. Reeves cleared his throat. "Mr. Carr, we need to put it on the record. Do you have any idea who might have sent this?" I hesitated. The mouth opened, but the voice did not come out, because deep down, saying her name out loud was like signing a certificate of emotional bankruptcy. But he did. My eyes surrendered before the words. Samantha. The name was stuck in the air, but everyone there felt it. Mike looked at me and said in a lower voice, "Look, even though it's non-lethal, this can be classified as a threat, a type of domestic harassment, mainly because it is premeditated on a symbolic day. This goes beyond the scare. This has intention." That hit me hard. Intention. That word hurt more than the very presence of the animal, because intention requires thought, coldness, choice. My daughter chose to hit me, calculatedly. Jessica turned and left the room. When he returned, he had a white envelope in his hand. "It arrived last week. I knew it wasn't just a card." She placed it on the table. It was sealed. In the corner, Samantha's lyrics. Straight, dry. I recognized it right away. I opened slowly. Inside, a card with a photo of a forest. On the back, a single sentence. "Some things need to crawl to teach you to look where you step. No subscription, no father, no happy day. Just that. The coldness of the gesture took my breath away. I stood with the card in my hand, shaking. Not anger, in mourning. Because there, I realized that it was no longer a fight. It was the end of something. A silent, cruel, almost clinical end. And that's when I want to tell you something. If you think you've seen the worst of this story, please stay with me until the end. Because what came next? It was the real coup. The part that no one imagines. And that changed everything, forever. Agent Reeves asked if I wanted to file a formal report. I looked at him and then at Jessica. She was teary-eyed, but he neither asked nor denied. He just waited. And I still didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to forget. Another part wanted justice. But there was still a third, the part that hurt the most. The one that still wanted to believe that all this was a misunderstanding, a phase, a crooked attempt to attract attention. But what happened the next day? He cleared up any remaining doubts, because that's when the phone finally rang. And it was her, Samantha, and what she said, I will never, ever forget. After Mike took the snake away and the patrol car disappeared on the corner of our street, the silence inside the house was heavier than any siren noise. Jessica didn't say anything. He just got up, went to the kitchen, and started putting away the lunch dishes that we didn't even get to prepare. The eggs have cooled in the pan. The pancakes were raw and dry on the plate, but that didn't matter anymore. I stayed in the living room, sat back in the rocking chair, and stayed there, quiet, only with the sound of my own heart trying to understand what had happened. The coffee Jessica had passed before was still on the table, in the mug I received on an old Christmas, with the inscription, "Best Dad in the World." I didn't even touch it. The sweet smell of coffee was gone, leaving only the bitterness at the bottom. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't break anything, but I kept silent. I kept silent as someone who loses a part of himself that doesn't come back, because no matter how much we prepare, when betrayal comes from where we loved it most, it doesn't cut like a knife. It poisons slowly. And you know what hurt me the most? It wasn't the snake. It was not the scandal. It was the symbology. She chose a serpent, an animal that crawls, that hides, who observes before attacking. And it was not a coincidence. It was thought out, cold, deliberate. It was her way of saying, "You're the problem. You are the enemy." And the cruelest? She used Father's Day itself as a stage. He transformed a sacred Sunday of memory and affection into a circus of revenge. I found myself thinking about all the times she threatened not to bring her grandchildren for Christmas. There was always an excuse, an outstanding debt, a veiled charge. That's how she kept me imprisoned for the children, for that idea that maybe one day things would go back to the way they were, but they never returned. And now I saw clearly. Samantha didn't want a father anymore. He wanted control. He wanted the inheritance ahead of time. He wanted power and obedience. And when he couldn't, sent a snake. A part of me still wanted to find some logic, some milder reason, but there wasn't. She chose to do it. Take it easy, with method. And when I realized this, it was as if everything inside me broke in silence. Allow me to stop here for a second and open my heart. There are moments when we understand that we have lost a person who is still alive, and it hurts more than a mourning. Because she is there with another face, another voice, but it's no longer who you loved. If you've ever felt that, comment below. He writes, "I know how it is," or "I understand you," because sometimes we need to know that we are not alone in this pain that no one sees. The clock was almost 3 in the afternoon when the phone rang. Jessica came from the kitchen, wiping her hands on the cloth. He looked at me. I knew it wasn't just any connection. I got up slowly and went to answer, and when I saw the name on the display, my stomach turned. Samantha. I took a deep breath and answered. Hello? What she said broke me inside, because it was there that I realized she had no remorse. I had no doubt. She knew exactly what she had done, and he still had the courage to play once again with my emotions. And what she said next, it was the final blow. But of that, I'll tell you about in the next part, because to this day, remembering that call still keeps me up at night. Her voice sounded clean on the other end of the line, almost casual. "Hi, Dad. It arrived right? The question came with that tone that only those who have no remorse can maintain. I was silent for a few seconds, trying to process. "It's here." That's all I could say. She laughed, as if it were an inside joke, as if we were both participating in a game. "Peter said you were going to call the police. You're getting so sensitive about these things, you know?" The calmness with which she spoke, that hurt me more than any aggression. "It was just to remind you to keep your eyes open, Dad. Lately it seems like you've forgotten who really cares about this family." Before I could answer, she hung up. The silence of the muted phone was like a dry slap in the face. I stood still, with the device still in my ear, listening to nothing, feeling everything. I didn't tremble. I didn't cry. I just felt a strange clarity set in, like a fog that dissipates. I walked to my office. I opened the door slowly. That room was the only corner of the house that still carried my order, my silence. I sat in front of the computer, the one I bought in retirement, more out of habit than necessity. I typed the bank's address into the browser. Login, password, verification. All automatic, as always. But that moment, it was not routine. I opened the Joint Accounts tab. I located her name, Samantha L. Carr, authorized user since 2012. I remembered the day I did that. She was pregnant with her first child. He said he wanted to have the freedom to act quickly in emergencies, and I believed it, as a father believes. I clicked Remove Access. The system asked for confirmation. I took a deep breath. Confirm. Done. Then I opened the Automatic Payments tab. One by one they were there. Her car insurance, academy tuition, rent an apartment that she said she shared with Peter, but that was only in my name. I canceled them all. Then I went to the secondary card menu, the one she used once in a while. When the salary was not enough, I changed the PIN. Then I paused the card. And finally, I deleted her name from the list of immediate beneficiaries. I felt like every click was a small funeral, not hers, but the image I carried as a protective father. That was all over. It was like burying someone still alive, someone who chose to kill our relationship in cold blood. I got up and looked at the old mirror that was on the desk. The eyes that stared back at me, they were others. There was no anger, nor despair. There was firmness. For the first time in many years, I recognized myself. "That's it," I muttered. The door opened behind me. Jessica entered slowly. She stood still for a moment. He stared at me. Her eyes didn't ask. They already knew. They just needed to listen. "Enough," I said, low but firm. She nodded, and in that simple gesture, I knew that she had also enclosed something inside her. The house was silent, but it was no longer the silence of pain. It was the silence of the decision. The serpent, I realized, was not the attack. It was the warning. The boat would come later if I did nothing. But now I was ready. And what I did next, no one expected it. Not even her. Not even him. Because some wounds are not treated with medicine, and they are treated with choices. And the one I was about to take, it would change the whole game. That night, sleep did not come. The pillow was soft as always, the room silent as usual, but inside me, something moved, restless. It was as if after so many years swallowing every word crossed, every veiled request, every humiliation disguised as affection, finally the time had come to put his feet on the ground. I got up slowly so as not to wake Jessica, put on my shoes and left through the front door. The Portland breeze, with that fresh smell of pine and wet earth, hugged me on the face like an old friend. I walked aimlessly along the sidewalks of the block. I passed in front of the houses of neighbors who had seen me for years as the quiet gentleman on the corner, and at that moment, I wished they could hear my thoughts. Because, inside me, a plan began to be born, and he wasn't made of anger. It was made of necessity, defense, of self-love. I didn't want revenge. He wanted freedom. He wanted peace. I wanted the right to grow old next to the woman who loved me from the beginning, without the weight of a daughter who confused affection with dominance. When I returned home, the porch light still on, I entered in silence and went straight to the bookshelf in the hallway. I took the black-covered notebook where, for years, I wrote down the household budget. How much came in, how much went out, how many pennies we saved month by month. He has always been my refuge of order. I sat at the table, took a blue pen, one of those cheap ones, and wrote on the first blank page, "It's not revenge, it's protection." I took a deep breath after that. It was as if that sentence took a weight off his chest. There, on that sheet, I began to sketch out every detail of what needed to be done. First, reorganize the accounts, transfer the funds that were exposed, separating savings into protected applications, inaccessible without judicial authorization. After, visit the family's lawyer, review the will, to ensure that if something happened to me or Jessica, every penny was safe from abuse. And more than that, to create a legal fund that would prevent the future manipulation of our grandchildren. It wasn't just money. It was our story, our sweat. And if Samantha didn't know how to honor that anymore, so it was no longer part of it. With each note, I felt firmer. It was not bitterness. It was clarity. Because when we are young, we think that love is synonymous with sacrifice, but over time, we learn that love is also knowing how to say enough. And look, if this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, help me carry it forward. Like and subscribe here to the channel. This makes more difference than you think. There is something very powerful in knowing that we are not alone when we decide to protect ourselves from those who should protect us. When I finished writing, it was almost 3 a.m. I closed the notebook, put it on the table, and right there, in the dark of the room, I made the hardest decision of my life. From that day on, Samantha would no longer have a space where there should only be respect. And it was with this in mind that, the next morning, I put on my best shirt, took the documents, and went to the office of the family's lawyer. But what he told me, it took me by surprise, and it changed the course of my entire plan. Margaret Summers welcomed me into the same light-walled office where, years ago, we sat to sign the deed to our house. Jessica and I were excited at that time, making plans, thinking about the birthdays that were yet to come, the Christmases with the fireplace lit and the family together. But this time I went in there with another weight. Margaret greeted me in that sober, gentle, but direct way, and when she asked me, "What can I help with, William?" I took a deep breath, and I told them everything. No flowering, from beginning to end. I talked about the box, from the snake, from the card with the poisonous phrase, of the silence that came after, and Samantha's call, cold, sarcastic, cruel. I also told of the years when she and Peter used their grandchildren as currency, of the blackmail disguised as necessity, of the subtle threats that came along with each request for help. Margaret listened in silence, taking notes calmly, with that black ink pen that I recognized from afar. When I finished, she crossed her fingers on the table and said, "Willian, what you are describing is not just a family conflict. It's emotional harassment, and it's escalating." The phrase fell heavily in the environment, but at the same time, it gave me a feeling that I wasn't crazy, that someone finally saw what was happening. Margaret suggested two immediate fronts. The first, total modification of the will. You need to make sure your assets go directly where it makes sense and are protected from those who abuse trust. The second, opening a process for a restraining order based on the events of Father's Day. A snake sent with premeditation in an anonymous package configuring psychological risk. That is enough argument. We don't have to wait for something worse to happen. I nodded silently. I knew she was right. I asked her to start the process of legal shielding. I wanted to create an educational fund in the name of my grandchildren, something run by a third party, without any access from Samantha or Peter. They won't touch a penny, but the children will not pay for the wickedness of their parents. Margaret smiled slightly, pleased with the decision. He began to type the terms into the computer. Precisely. "Do you want this fund to come into effect only after your death?" I interrupted her. "No. I want it to come into force while I am still alive. I want to see with my own eyes that they no longer have control." She nodded, and in that moment, I felt like I was finally taking the reins of my own story. And if you've made it this far with me, I need to tell you something. What comes next is when the game really changes. Because until now, I was only defending myself. But what's next? That's when I start to act. Margaret continued working on the papers while I looked at a picture on her bookshelf. She and her two young children at a picnic by the Columbia River. I thought about my grandchildren. The time Samantha would say, "If it doesn't help, they won't see you this month." That hurt. But now, for the first time, I was taking a step to prevent the pain from becoming routine. Before leaving, Margaret looked at me and said, "You still love your daughter, William. But now you are choosing to love yourself as well. That's it. It's what's going to save you." And I didn't answer with words. I just held the document folder to my chest, left the office, and looked at the gray Portland sky. Because the next step, it was going to mess with the structures, and she still had no idea what was coming. I returned home with the document folder in my lap, and my heart calmer than in the previous days. But there was still work to do. Margaret had asked me for bank statements for the last 2 years, to substantiate the history of transactions and legally justify the cuts I had already made. I went to the office, opened the bottom drawer, and started pulling the folders in order of date. Each envelope, each printed paper was a piece of the history of our financial life, from the bills paid with sweat to the small Christmas presents bought in silence. I sat down at the table, adjusted my glasses, and began to review line by line. Some expenses I already knew by heart: pharmacy, supermarket, house insurance, monthly donation to the church. But suddenly, an entrance caught my eye. It was a high amount, higher than usual, coming straight from my personal account, or $4,800 6 months ago. The description was generic: Family Advisory, SJL Consulting, Seattle, WA. I frowned. I have never hired any service of this type, much less in Seattle. I kept scouring. There was one more, smaller transfer, 3 weeks later. Same name, same company code. I picked up the phone and dialed the number of that consultancy, which was printed on one of the electronic receipts. A woman answered politely. I confirmed the name, said I was checking a movement. She asked for a minute and came back soon after. "Yes, Mr. Carr. These amounts correspond to the consultation and initial fees of a succession planning process, requested by Samantha Carr." My blood ran cold. Succession planning, a beautiful euphemism for trying to anticipate a heritage that didn't even exist yet. The attendant continued as if she had not said anything much. She consulted the possibility of contesting the current will based on financial dependence and anticipated right, but the process did not go forward. I thanked him, hung up, and I stood there with the phone still in my hand, staring at the wall. She tried to take me alive. He tried to change the structure I had built for decades. with the excuse that he was entitled to something that I have not even finished living, and when he couldn't, he sent the box. The snake was Plan B. Plan A was to rip me off on paper, in silence, with a lawyer's signature. It was unlike anything else, because until then, I thought Samantha was just lost, hurt, acting on impulse. But no, she was acting methodically, with strategy, like someone who sets up a board and tries to take it out of me piece by piece. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and felt a memory come back, out of nowhere. The day she fell off her bike for the first time. He was 7 years old. I dropped everything at work, ran to school, arrived sweaty, desperate, thinking it was something serious, but it was just a scratch on the knee. Still she cried, and I took her in my arms, promising that I would always take care of her. And for a moment, sitting there in the office, I wondered, how did someone you held in your arms with so much love, do you turn into someone who stabs you in the back? It's amazing how certain memories live inside us like a scar, and even after so long, hurt as if they were from yesterday. No, if you also have a strong memory like this, good or bad, write here in the comments. Share with me. Sometimes revisiting these things helps you understand where it all began. I closed the envelope with the statements. I put everything in the folder, and at that moment, something inside me changed places. He was no longer just a hurt father. He was a man who needed to protect what he built. It was a husband trying to ensure that the woman next to him could grow old in peace. And that's when I decided to go further. If she wanted to play in the legal field, so that's where I was going to win. But what I found out the next day, during a trip to the notary's office, made me understand that she had already gone even further than I imagined. It was a gray Thursday, with heavy skies and the wind blowing low through the pine trees. I was pruning some rose bushes in the front yard, which I have always done with pleasure, when I heard the sound of the car braking in a hurry at the entrance. I got up slowly, wiped my hands on my old apron, and even before I turned around, I already knew who it was. Samantha. And of course, Peter next door. The car door slammed dry. She came forward, stiff steps, without even pretending kindness. He followed her with that air of superiority that he always carried. Arms crossed, chin up, crooked smile of someone who thinks he controls everything. "Can we talk?" she said, as if nothing had happened. As if the previous weeks had not been a whirlwind of betrayal, threat, and coldness. I didn't move. I stood there, holding the pruning shears firmly, and replied, looking straight into her eyes. "No more talking." She faltered for a second, surprised by her firmness, but he soon pulled himself together. "Dad, you're exaggerating," I continued in a low voice but without hesitation. "You've used me for decades, Samantha." He asked me for help, lied, manipulated. Then he tried to scare me with what he sent to this house, and when it didn't work, he tried to take me to justice. And now you show up here, at my door, asking for a conversation? She opened her mouth to retort, but Peter stepped forward. "He thinks he can cut us like this as if he were God." And he laughed, that muffled, humorless laugh. I took a deep breath. Inside I trembled, but on the outside it was firm, resolute. It was no longer the father trying to understand his daughter. It was the man defending the home. "You have crossed a boundary that there is no turning back." Samantha changed. "Dad, you're making a mistake, a very serious mistake." And before I could answer, she threw out the phrase she had been guarding like a knife. "If you cut off our access, you'll never see Emma and Jake again." The silence that came after was louder than any scream. She looked at me angrily, as if she expected to see me break, as if he still believed that I was the same man who swallowed everything in the name of peace. But I didn't break down. I only answered, with the calm of someone who no longer fears. "If you use them as currency, maybe I shouldn't want to see them in that environment." Her face trembled. Her eyes widened, as if I had delivered the worst of blows. And in a way it really was. Because there, for the first time, I stopped clinging to what no longer existed. Emma and Jake were my grandchildren. I loved them. But allowing them to be weapons of blackmail, it would be betraying everything I believe in as a man, father, and grandfather. Peter pulled Samantha by the arm. "Let's go. This old man is going to die alone." But she didn't move. He stood there, looking at me as if he saw a wall rise where there was once a door. And perhaps, at that moment, she understood that she had lost something that money would never buy back. I didn't say anything else. I just went inside the house, closed the door, and went to the kitchen where Jessica was waiting for me with a glass of water already in her hands. "Is it over?" she asked. And I replied, "Now it has begun." because what they didn't know, the next step was ready, and the way I fought back in a silent and definitive way was yet to come. The next day, very early, the phone rang. It was Margaret. Her voice, always firm, sounded different this time, more purposeful. "Willian, the documents are ready. I just need your signature and Jessica's." The clock read 7:30. The city was still waking up. Jessica poured coffee into 2 cups, saying nothing. He just looked at me, and in that look, there was the fatigue of someone who loved too much and was sucked to the limit. We drank coffee in silence, then put on our best clothes, the ones we always wore for serious occasions, not out of vanity, but out of respect. Driving to Margaret's office was like walking through a tunnel. I didn't see the trees nor the shops passing by. I could only hear my own breathing and the sound of the tires on the damp asphalt. When we arrived, Margaret had everything ready on the table. "Here are the changes in the will, Willian, and here, the restraining order." Jessica held my hand, firm but cold. "Before you sign it, I want you to understand what this represents. After today, legally, Samantha and Peter will not be able to approach you or make any direct contact. And, as for the will, the estate is now safeguarded in an educational fund intended exclusively for his grandchildren, managed by an independent institution. No direct access by parents, not even you, will be able to change this alone." I shook my head. He understood perfectly. I picked up the pen. My hands didn't tremble. I signed my name as someone who closes a cycle, not with anger but with peace. Jessica did the same. Margaret watched us with that look of someone who knows she is helping someone to survive, even if it hurts. When we finished, she stacked the sheets, stamped them, and said, "Now you are protected, legally and emotionally. The rest, it's reconstruction." We drove back home in silence. Jessica stared out the window, lost in memories I had no way of consoling. Outside, the sun was beginning to break through the clouds. A new day. I went in, hung up my coat, sat in the office armchair, and took a deep breath. The feeling was strange, a mixture of relief and grief. It was as if I had just lost a daughter, but gained back my own life. I took out my cell phone and started doing what I should have done years ago. I changed all passwords, deleted shared access, closed joint accounts, deactivated cards. In less than an hour, it no longer existed within my digital world. I could no longer reach myself for the money, the messages, the excuses. I stared at the screen for a while, not thinking about anything. Then I closed the laptop and went to the mirror in the hallway. That old walnut-framed mirror which had been with me since the first apartment. I looked at myself. The gray hair, the deep wrinkles, the tired eyes. But there was something new there. A man who has finally learned that to love is not to annul himself, that being a father is not eternally carrying the weight of those who refuse to grow up. And it was there, standing in front of that reflection, that I said to myself, I need to relearn how to be a father without being a bank. Jessica appeared behind me and put her hand on my shoulder. And grandfather without being a hostage, he added. I smiled slightly. For the first time in a long time, the air inside the house seemed light. The tension that once lived in every corner was gone. However, deep in my chest, I knew that this peace was only the beginning of a new kind of battle, the internal one. The heart still didn't know how to stop waiting for the ringing of the phone, the regretful message, the request for forgiveness that might never come. Late that afternoon, I made an appointment with a psychologist. When the secretary asked why, I answered without thinking, I need to learn to move on without fear of loving wrong. She was silent for a few seconds before making the appointment. I closed the phone and went back to the balcony. The sun set behind the trees in the neighborhood, and there, sitting in the same chair where it all began, I felt a new kind of freedom. Sad, but clean. Little did I know that the next day would bring one last test, one last phone call, one last loop to be cut. And this, it would hurt more than everyone else. The following days were a whirlwind. At first, the phone wouldn't stop. Messages, calls, notifications, a flood coming from Samantha. They started with requests. Dad, call me, please. It was a misunderstanding. I was nervous. Then came the excuses. You don't understand what I go through with Peter. I just wanted to get your attention. And when he saw that the silence persisted, the words began to change tone. You're going to regret it. It's destroying our family. You won't see your grandchildren ever again. The messages came one after the other, almost automatic, as if she herself didn't already know what she was saying. I read some, erased others. Deep down, there was no pain anymore. just tiredness. Peter, on the other hand, wasted no time. He called screaming, left angry messages in the mailbox, as if he were screaming into a mirror. Ungrateful old man, you should be thankful that you have a daughter who still cares. Cruel irony. Jessica tried to stand her ground, but sometimes I saw her hands shaking as she held her phone. One day, she showed me a post by Samantha on social media, a photo of her crying accompanied by the caption, "When even blood turns your back, I was abandoned by my parents." Those words cut me slightly, but I soon realized what was underneath. Dozens of comments. And among them, one or another well-known name. People we saw at barbecues, at children's birthdays. One wrote, "But didn't your father help you every month?" Another, "And the car he gave, did you give it back?" Gradually, the mask began to fall. Victimhood, which had previously found an echo, now turned into noise. Because the truth, when it comes, does not need to scream. It just needs to exist. And there it was, spreading slowly, dismantling the farce. Meanwhile, Margaret called me. "Willian, they tried the last blow." I asked what it was about. "A lawsuit for financial abandonment." Peter signed on her behalf. I was quiet for a moment. Then I asked, and she let out a brief, satisfied sigh. 3 days, Willian. It was the time it took me to dismantle everything. I gave the judge all the statements, receipts, transfers. Do you know what she said in court? I didn't answer. She looked at the papers, had a short laugh, and said, "This is not abandonment. It's liberation." I was silent. That word, deliverance, echoed in my head like a church bell on an early Sunday. Jessica cried when I told her, not of sadness, but of relief, because finally someone outside our home had seen what we had been living for so long, the weight of guilt disguised as love. The weeks passed. The phone, once frantic, was falling silent. The messages decreased, the calls ceased. Her posts became more spaced out until they disappeared. And what was left was the emptiness, not that of absence, but that of truth finally spoken. I watched everything in silence, without euphoria, without rancor. It was like watching the slow dismantling of a sandcastle. Samantha, who had always controlled the plot of her own version, now found herself without a stage, without an audience, without applause. Peter, who thought he was the strategist, disappeared from the net, probably ashamed of having missed the last bluff. I sat on the porch one afternoon as the sun went down and realized that I hadn't heard their voices in weeks. Not a message, not even a visit. And for the first time, that didn't hurt me. It was a different silence, a silence of a new beginning. You know, there are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling we help another heart to breathe. Like this video, and sign up, and let's make this story reach those who need it. Because no one deserves to live a prisoner of those who call love what in fact is control. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't come with a hug. It comes with distance. And time, always it, is in charge of showing who was true and who was disguise. But even in the midst of this new calm, something still worried me. A gut feeling. A knot that would not unravel. I thought it was all over. That justice and silence would suffice. But then a few weeks later, a letter arrived. No sender. Addressed to me. And what was inside reopened all the wounds. The letter arrived on a cold morning, with the wind beating sideways on the windows and the smell of fresh coffee around the house. Jessica was the one who took the mailbox and left it on the table. No sender, just my name written in a shaky handwriting, as if the paper itself was afraid to be read. I stared at that envelope for a few minutes before opening it. Inside there was no offense or threat, just a short sentence written in blue pen. "Dad, do you really think you can erase me from your life like this?" And at the bottom, the children's drawing of two holding hands, a crooked line, just like what Samantha did on cards when she was a girl. I didn't cry, but the lump in my throat was inevitable. Jessica came closer, put her hand on my shoulder, and said only, "She still tries to pull you back into the hole." I nodded, and at that moment I realized that the difference is that this time, I knew how to protect myself. The past was still knocking on the door, but it no longer ruled over me. That same day, I received a call from Margaret confirming the educational fund had officially opened. Emma and Jake now had their names recorded on a legal record, protected by law, with a neutral trustee taking care of everything. Not a penny would pass through the hands of Samantha or Peter. Jessica, in her soft handwriting, wrote a letter to her 2 grandchildren, keeping inside the envelope an old photograph of us, the 4 of us together on a picnic. In the text, he said, You will always have our love and our support. But now, love comes in a different way, the way that doesn't have to be bought or charged. We sealed the letter with an affection that did not need forgiveness. I, in turn, sat in front of the computer and looked at the extract at the bottom. There were their names, side by side, in firm, protected, free letters. It was like watching the sun rise inside a document. That was my way of continuing to be a grandfather, but without being a hostage. Time passed and the restraining order was finally approved. Margaret warned me that any attempt at direct contact would be considered a crime. I never thought that one day I would need the law to protect my own heart, but that's what I did. The first time Samantha tried to break the agreement was discreet, a short message, sent by a new number. "Dad, can we talk?" I deleted it without answering. The second attempt was bolder. She appeared on the sidewalk, across the street, standing there, looking at the house. He didn't go in. He didn't scream. He just stayed there. I saw her through the window, and instead of opening the door, I picked up the phone and called the police. The officer who came, a calm, gentle-spoken man, asked if I wanted to press charges. "Not yet," I replied, "but I want her to know that I saw it." 2 weeks later, it happened again. She came alone this time. He stopped on the porch, crying, knocking on the door. Jessica was shaking in the kitchen, afraid that something worse would happen. I took a deep breath, looked through the glass curtain and saw my daughter's face, haggard, tired, but still trying the same old game, guilt and pity. I picked up the phone. I called the police. When the car arrived, she was still there, and I heard the officer's firm voice urging her to move away. "Ms. Carr, the restraining order is clear. Mr. Willian cannot be approached." She cried, but this time, there was no audience, no applause, only the echo of one's own choice. I saw her being led to the car, and when I saw her disappear around the bend in the street, I felt a strange kind of peace, a silent justice. It was not revenge. It was balance coming back into place. You know, the funny thing about life is that sometimes justice doesn't come in the form of a shout. It comes in the form of silence. And it is in this silence that we discover who we really are. If you're listening to me now, stay with me until the end, because the most memorable moment is yet to come. What seemed closed, he still had one last twist in store. And what happened after that night? Everything changed. Again, time passed, and with it, the news began to arrive in a fragmented way, like echoes of a story that no longer belonged to me. He learned first from Margaret, then from a mutual neighbor, and finally from the children's school itself. Peter was gone. Simple as that. He took the car, took what he could, and left Samantha with the debts, the deadlines, and the silences. He said he needed space, Margaret said, with that professional calm, but with the look of someone who knew the weight of those words. Deep down, I already expected it. The kind of love that is born of interest dies at the first breath of difficulty. With no more money, no more inheritance, no more luxury of monthly aid that she thought was eternal, Samantha had to go down steps she never imagined. He left the large house in Beaverton and moved with Emma and Jake to a small apartment in Gresham, near the train tracks, where the noise of the iron seems to remind all the time that life doesn't stop for anyone. The children were enrolled in public schools, and the perks, piano lessons, private English, designer clothes, all became memories. I learned about this because the administrator of the educational fund sent me a report. It said with a cold formality that Samantha had tried to contact Jessica through the school phone, asking for emotional and provisional support. The assistant, trained for these situations, recorded the call and sent a copy to the lawyer. When I read the document, I was silent for a few seconds. Jessica looked at me, expecting some reaction, but what came out of my mouth was only, "She's feeling finally what it's like to live without destroying the one she loves." And he said nothing more. The truth is that, inside me, there was a mixture of compassion and distance. I didn't want her suffering. I never wished. But sometimes, life needs to teach with the same weapons that the person chose to use. And she had made manipulation her language. Now she was talking to herself. Over time, the friends began to disappear. The people who used to laugh at Peter's jokes at dinners, who praised the happy photos on Instagram, disappeared one by one. No one wants to be reminded of their own reflection when the varnish falls off. And with it, the varnish fell off entirely. She learned that the neighbors avoided her, that the mothers at school whispered behind their backs, that Emma's teacher once asked quietly, "Is your mother all right?" And the girl innocently replied, She sleeps a lot, but I think she is. That tore me inside when I heard it, because the children, they didn't ask for any of that, and even so, they inherited the cold. The only inheritance Samantha still had was silence. The silence of the doors that closed. The silence of friends who disappeared. The silence of her parents who once loved her more than themselves, and now could only pray from afar. And it was in this silence that she began to see the reflection of what she had become. I once received an old photo in the mail. No sender, but I knew it was hers. It was the image of the three of us in a park in Eugene, holding melting ice cream. On the back, only a short sentence. I screwed up, didn't I? I was looking at that for a long time. The yellowed paper, the worn edges, the smile that no longer existed. And at that moment I realized that the heaviest punishment was not mine to give. It was hers, for carrying the memory of the father she lost out of greed. Life is relentless, but also fair. It accurately returns everything we deliver to the world, and sometimes with interest. But what happened next? It was different, because just when I thought everything was finally resolved, unexpected news knocked on my door, and what it carried inside completely changed the course of everything again. Spring arrived with more colors than I remembered. I, who have always taken care of the garden as if taking care of a promise, felt something different on earth this time. It was not only the softness of the flowers or the perfume of the roses that perfumed the air, but the feeling of being, in fact, in my place, of not having to worry about the weight of the past that, for so long, I carried on my back. Each leaf that fell from the trees seemed to free me from a piece of anguish, of regret. The grass grew back without me having to force it. The garden seemed to know exactly when it was time to move on. And I, in the same way, began to learn that peace also comes from letting go. I began to reconnect with the things that made me feel alive before all this. I went back to reading my favorite books, the ones that were dusty on the shelf, waiting patiently for my attention. I allowed myself to absorb stories that didn't have the emotional charge of everything I experienced, just narratives that fed the mind without demanding a piece of my heart. One afternoon, while Jessica was making tea in the kitchen, I took courage and started attending the woodworking workshop at the local senior center. I have never been good with tools. I have always found myself more comfortable with words than with wood, but something there brought me a sense of renewal. The sound of the saw cutting through the cedar, the polished wood under my fingers, all of it was simple but profound. It was as if, with each piece of wood I carved, I was also carving something inside me, a new beginning. Saturday afternoons were mine now, and while the silence between me and Jessica still carried a soft melancholy, it wasn't heavier. It was only the stillness of life that no longer needed further explanation. One day I returned home with a small wooden painting that I made in the workshop, something simple but mine. I put it on the wall of my office next to the photo of Samantha, the one from when she was 7, sitting on my shoulders, smiling as if life were eternal fun. It was not a photo of nostalgia. It was just a reminder of what I gave, what I did for her, and what she chose to do with it all. Sometimes looking at this photo reminded me that I'm not to blame for everything that happened. I loved her in every way I knew how, but no one can carry another person forever. I couldn't have done more. That afternoon, like everyone else, Jessica sat next to me. She knew what I was thinking. She always knew. "I don't regret what I did for her," I said quietly, as I looked at the photo. "I regret taking so long to say enough is enough." She held my hand as she always did, with the same softness as when we started our walk together, many years ago. There was no more crying. There were no more difficult words. We were alone, but together, and that was enough. There was no more fright, no fear, only peace. A kind of peace that comes from within, from something you build on your own. Because in the end, we are all responsible for our own peace. Jessica looked into my eyes and smiled. That smile that told me everything without needing any more words. That smile that already knew how much we both went through to get there. And I, for the first time in many years, looked at her and saw the woman who never left me, even when all seemed lost. And old age, I thought, was not weakness. It was a chance to stop apologizing for existing. It is time to accept that we are human, that we have done the best we could, and that now, with the weight of experience, we can live without the burden of regret. But as I sat there peacefully in the corner of the room, I knew there was still something that needed to be resolved, something that was about to happen, something that, in a way, would bring out the last lesson of this story. Because, as always, Life has its way of reminding us that, even in calm, something can move in the shadows. She sent me a snake. I didn't know I was ready for the cut. When I look back, I see that every moment, every choice I made led me to this point. I, who had spent my life trying to correct the mistakes of others, finally came to understand that the only person I needed to change was myself. The pain of Samantha's betrayal, the incessant requests, the manipulation, all of this seemed so heavy at the time. But now when I think about everything I have experienced, I can only see a path trodden with the clarity that peace has brought. The silence that once hurt is now protection. There are no more shadows, no more accusations. Justice was done, but not with screams and revenge. Peace came without confrontation. Freedom came in the most dignified format, the end of dependence. I realized that for a long time, I had lived in the shadow of a relationship that was unhealthy for anyone. Not for me, not for Samantha, not for my grandchildren. But what life has taught me, and what I hope you take away from this story, is that love without limit becomes prison. When you give everything to someone without worrying about what it does to you, you become a hostage. And I chose to live free, freed from the chains of guilt, freed from the manipulations of the past, freed from the fear of being accused for something I didn't do. I chose to be a father and grandfather without it being a transaction, a debt, or an obligation. I chose to be loved without having to be a bargaining chip. I know that many people out there are experiencing something similar. Maybe not exactly what I experienced, but the feeling of being trapped by someone or something that takes away your peace. That's why I shared this story with you. Not to show what I am, but to show that over time the truth always appears. And when it comes, the feeling of liberation is unparalleled. If you also believe that the freedom to live according to what really matters is worth more than anything, give me a virtual hug here with your like and subscribe to the channel. This helps spread this message to those who need it most. Oh, and tell me in the comments where you're watching. Let's make this community a space where we can support each other and learn together. And of course, it activates the bell, so you don't miss it when the coffee is ironed again. Because this story, my friend, will continue. Don't go away yet. Listen to the next true story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.